plausible when he talks about it. And
you have a man crush on John Searle.
yeah, that's actually the way how I study philosophy. I mean, I find some philosopher and read as long as I can, like, his books, and now watch his lectures as well. Since before I basically was reading books, and it's it's fascinating that now we have the internet and you may read books and simultaneously watch some lectures on the internet. Imagine that we had it like 500 years ago. So now you may watch some Descartes, Hume, Locke, Nietzsche, Kant, like 100 lectures by Kant.
Yeah.
I would like to watch his lectures and listen to what he will say instead of reading his critique of tourism or other books which are quite difficult to understand. Probably he could speak. Like I've heard when I was reading Hegel and many commentaries of his philosophy, they all claimed that when he was speaking, he was so clear, but when you read him, it's almost incomprehensible. And yeah, now it's like you don't have an opportunity to listen to him, but you have these books and you have to fight your way through all these syllogisms and ideas.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it seems that he did okay, Hegel, because everybody's still talking about him, and that was a long time ago. That was what, 200 years ago. So he did okay for himself.
He died 190 years ago.
Yeah, so there you go.
1831.
Is he still your favorite philosopher?
Well, I just spent half a year reading his books.
You just spent half the year just reading his books, yeah. Maybe it wouldn't be as interesting if it was too clear,
Well, maybe I agree. So it's when something's very puzzling, it gives you kind of extra, not motivation, but not maybe when you get something easily, you don't value so much.
Exactly.
But when
that's true about everything.
Do a certain amount of labor, as if you earn it, and
yeah, if you have to put resources into something, you value it more for sure. Or even if it's just if it doesn't seem like it's easy, like everything that is easy and easily available, you don't tend to value it as much. That's clear human psychology. But when it's difficult, then yeah.
I don't think it's true in case of knowledge, since now everything is easily available, and I find more value in free knowledge than in some courses. For example, people make lots of courses where you have to pay for taking these courses, and most of them are, I don't know about most of them, of course, but those which I have taken, which I paid for, they didn't seem to me more valuable than those which I can find for free.
Philosophy courses, you mean?
Yeah, some philosophy course, some writing, linguistic courses, language, for example. To study language, there's so much. They made so much business out of this enterprise. I mean, like,
studying languages.
Yeah, basically, well, here where I live, there are people. Very, very, very small amount of people speak English, but there are so many schools almost on each corner, and in these schools they teach you grammar, and you have to pay quite a lot of money. But they don't speak English. They teach grammar. They tell you everything about these tenses, verbs, adjectives, nouns, whatever, all these terms. But most of them don't speak English, and you have to pay lots of money to take these courses.
Right, and yeah, like a big problem of some of those courses is that they try to teach a language in a different language. Like for example, in Russia they would speak in Russian
Imagine,
They're
yeah.
trying to teach English, which is very ineffective.
Yeah, but
Uh,
also it's they don't teach real language; they teach grammar. For example, now
yeah, and they teach grammar, which is not. Yeah, it's part of teaching a language, but it's not the whole thing.
yeah, now I study grammar. I actually started seriously studying it quite recently, maybe a few months ago. Before I could spend 10, 15 minutes a day, not every day, but from time to time. And I didn't think about it. So now what changed is that I started thinking about grammar. So I may go for a walk and think about, the sentence structure, like the subject group, the verb group, some predicate, verbal manners, time, place, what is like the definition of a subject, what is an object, how they relate to each other, some relative clauses, noun clauses, etc. And everything, and it makes perfect sense when I think about it. Well, I may understand better the structure of the language, but then I also understand that to know all this body of grammar basically takes you years. But you, after mastering this body of grammar, you still can speak English. So you just know certain concepts which you can apply when you talk about these concepts. See that you will not be able to have a conversation if I, for example, studied grammar. I would be able to talk only about grammar and explaining all these differences in these terms.
Right.
But it would be almost impossible to have a real conversation. So again, I have a speaking club, and there are very few people who are like teachers of grammar or teachers of English who come to my club. And there's some people, most of the people who come to the club, they learn to speak by themselves. So they kind of first learn to speak and then, maybe learn grammar.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to learn a language efficiently, or effectively, we need to be immersed in that language to some extent. Just studying grammar doesn't really cut it, because it's very abstract. Grammar is best. I feel that it's a lot better if you can apply it. If you can apply grammar to a language, it makes sense. But if you just study the grammar first,
Yeah.
you don't know like what it's for. You don't know. It's like it's very abstract, and it just doesn't work that way. The brain, I don't think it really works that way.
Yeah, sure. And
It's like having all these rules, but you have nothing to use the rules for. Like, what do you do with these rules? It doesn't. You don't know. You don't have a use for them, and so it's very hard to even understand them.
I think it's a powerful tool when you already know the language, as you said. Like
Yeah.
when you can speak, when you can use the language in your daily life, then it's maybe useful to, like what I'm doing right now, to study grammar, to improve your writing, to improve your ability to express your thoughts clearly. But at the beginning, again, and it's usually so boring.
It's very boring. Grammar is always boring, but it's not quite as boring if you actually know what you're using it for, because then it's a little bit like a game. Oh, you go, you do this and you do that, that goes here and there. But if it's just like completely abstract, then yeah, I mean it's as boring as it can be. I like in high school when like I remember that's how they taught languages as well in school, not just high school, in school in general. And it was for me, it was completely pointless because I didn't understand anything. Like I hated studying languages in school. I was terrible at it, but it was also completely useless because I didn't really get anything from it. And it's like you're saying, yeah, thinking back, I think that was the mistake. Yeah, they just focus on teaching grammar when, we didn't know the language. If you're trying to learn grammar without, having an understanding of the language, it's pointless.
I think the same may be applied to philosophy. So you study some philosophical concepts from one or another philosopher, and when they're taken apart from the philosopher himself, it may be also kind of stupid and pointless. So like for me, as I said, like it's better to take one philosopher and basically immerse myself into his like in everything he did, he thought of and tried to like not just learn his concepts, but kind of consider life from his perspective, like reading the language and trying to understand what was going on in his life, why this philosopher created all these metaphysical assertions, what was his motivation, and yeah, it's kind of first you make yourself familiar with the philosopher, but then probably makes sense to go on Wikipedia. Like after reading few, like 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 original books, it makes sense to go on Wikipedia and read some, summaries of his work to structure better your understanding, especially if you want to talk about it with other people, to explain to somebody, someone else's philosophy. And now I find it very confusing. For example, I'm reading grammar, and I know that I'm doing it for myself, but still there's always some desire to not memorize it, but to be able to explain it as if I have to deliver it to somebody else and talk about it. And especially since I'm running the speaking club, often we have some conversations, and I think of how would I explain this concept to another person? How would I put it? And it slows me down so much. So instead of reading like 1, 2, 3 hours and basically observe what's going on in the book, and I slow down and trying to know how would I explain it, and then it takes I may think for an hour about one page.
Yeah, I mean, teaching is a good way to learn, though, because you're teaching because you have to teach. You pay more attention, so you have to, and because you have to figure out how to explain it to someone. I think that's the best way to actually to learn something. It's teaching something is a way to learn something in a sense.
Yeah, but it's too slow. I don't like that it's very slow, and you have to stop so many times to refresh your ideas. So I prefer to, if in case of philosophy, I prefer to take like 5, 10 books of one philosopher and just read them as fast as possible, a few months, without actually puzzling myself too much with all. Like if I don't understand something, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, and just go on and read as fast as possible. I'm trying to basically maintain certain quality of attention. So if I feel that I don't understand anything, I just stop and wait for the next day. But the point is kind of to develop a certain quality of attention, and you may focus it on a book and maintain it for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, so as long as you can. And in Russian, I was very successful at that. So I could finally I could read for 10 hours every day for weeks.
You're reading for 10 hours every day?
No, not now. I mean, in Russian. In 2014, I was able to turn off the internet for half a month and just read 4, 5, 10 books at once.
Yeah, that's intense.
But now in English, it's almost impossible. So I struggle again. It takes me sometimes. I can't read more than 50 pages a day.
Yeah.
Still, it was like almost the same 1 year ago, and it's the same as now. So if I read more, I just feel kind of overwhelmed. There's tinnitus, all sorts of.
Do you still read stuff in Russian?
No, almost very little. Probably like the last book I was reading, Lenin. It was I guess 3 months ago when I had problems with English and with video games. So I shifted back to Russian for a couple of days, and in Russian the last kind of I was reading Lenin. Like we have in our library the collected works of Lenin, like 50 volumes, 50 thick volumes, like 500-600 pages each volume.
And he wrote all of that?
Well, most of it, yeah, here, but there are some kind of commentaries. But essentially, like there's 50 volumes in library, and I started reading it at 2016. I decided to read all 50 volumes since it was very, 50 volumes is kind of huge endeavor. And I
Wow.
and I got to 12, like I read only 10 volumes, like the first 10 volumes, and then I shift to English.
Okay. What is it about, these 50 volumes? What
But
is it?
whenever I get back, if I read something, I continue reading like this. Well, it's about this period of time since the end of 19th century and
Yeah,
the first few decades of 20th century.
right. And,
It's
and it's
about essentially it's all about revolution and how it how these social democrats, social de- what's the name? Man, I have to translate all of this. So how these parties were developed, like
uh-huh.
Marxists and Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, what were the conflict between them, and how they struggled with bourgeoisie, and all sorts of all sorts of. But mostly, it's just a persuasion of you know the working class and kind of attacks on imperialism, like especially
Yeah, but it seems it would be a little bit repetitive to do all that in 50 volumes, right? Thick volumes.
yeah, but it's a history. I
It's
mean,
a
it's
history.
there was a couple of newspapers. Like one was Iskra, which I guess it may be translated like ignite,
Hmm.
but and ignite. I don't know is it like I know it's a verb ignite, but I don't know can you use it as a noun. But so
Yeah, 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 you can. Yeah, you can. Because I actually, there was a magazine called Ignite. It was a student magazine when I was at university and in England, and it was actually called Ignite.
it was the first book
It
which
wasn't about, it wasn't about like politics at all. It was about like more like social stuff, about students and young people and stuff like that. So the subject was completely different, but it was called Ignite.
so the first magazine was developed by first magazine which Lenin was writing it was this Ignite, and then it was another proletariat. Like I got only to 1905, so now it's the 10th volume, and it's not even 10, it's 12th volume actually, and it's only 1905. So there's 10 years more, and yeah, I like the style. It's like Lenin was very careful writer, so it's like they argue about words. Like there maybe one, there are some documents, like historical documents, and their party. It's very hard to translate all of this. So the essential idea, they may have a uh, certain rules. They may outline these rules, and they may argue about these rules in an entire book, like which term is right to use, which is wrong, and how to
Oh,
how
wow.
this how this word must be replaced with that word, and yeah, but like the style, I think the style in Russian literature, it's very hard to find anything like that.
All right. Well, do you want to read a little bit of the our skepticism book?
So let's do that.
Okay. So we were in this the 10 modes chapter, right?
Yeah, I've actually finished reading the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and an article on Sextus Empiricus. Just
Yeah.
just today I finished this one, and yeah, I recommend you to read it as well if you have time. There's some interesting ideas, but yeah, we stopped. I guess I guess we already read it. Like let's.
Maybe. So should we jump to the next chapter?
No, stop it here. Like, can you waste it?
Um.
see another across the other students as well.
Yeah, because we had done already this section. So maybe.
Yeah, I guess we'll stop somewhere here.
Yeah, and yeah. Okay, but one can see this more clearly from the preferences and aversions of animals. Thus, perfume seems very pleasant to human beings, but intolerable to dung beetles and bees, and the application of olive oil is beneficial to human beings, but kills wasps and bees. And to human beings, seawater is unpleasant and even poisonous to drink, while to fish it is most pleasant and potable. And pigs bathe more happily in the worst stinking mud than in clear and pure water. And well, basically, he's reiterating the fact that people and animals perceive things in the same thing in different ways, according to their circumstances and characteristics. And of animals, some eat grass and others cat bushes, some eat wood and others seeds or meat or milk. Some like their food aged and others fresh, and some like it raw and others like it prepared by cooking. And in general, the things that are pleasant to some animals are unpleasant, repugnant, and even poisonous to others. Thus, hemlock fattens quails, and hyoscyamus fattens pigs, and pigs enjoy eating salamanders, as a deer enjoy eating poisonous creatures, and swallows enjoy blister beetles. Ants and mosquitoes, when swallowed by human beings, produce discomfort and stomachache. Whereas the she-bear, if she feels somehow weak, is strengthened by licking them up. The adder is stupefied by the mere touch of a branch of oak, and the bat by a leaf of the plane tree. The elephant fears the ram, the lion, the rooster, sea monsters, the crackling of bursting beans, the tiger, the sound of a drum. And it is possible to give further examples, but that we may not seem more prolix than necessary. If the same things are unpleasant to some but pleasant to others, and if the pleasure and unpleasantness lie in the fantasiae, then differing animals receiving different fantasiae from the external objects. But if the same things do appear differently because of the difference of animals, then we shall be in a position to say how the external object looks to us, but we shall suspend judgment on how it is in nature. For we shall not be able to decide between our fantasiae and those of the other animals, since we are part of the dispute, and thus are in need of someone to make the decision, rather than competent to pass judgment ourselves. Besides, we shall not be able to give preference, whether with or without proof, to our fantasiae over those of the non-rational animals. For in addition to the possibility of there being no such thing as proof, as we shall point out, any purported proof will either be apparent or not apparent to us. And if, on the other hand, on the one hand, it is not apparent, then we shall not accept it with confidence. But if, on the other, it is apparent to us, then since what is apparent to animals is the very matter in question, and the proof is apparent to us animals, the proof itself will be in question as to whether, as apparent, it is true. But it is absurd to try to settle the matter in question by means of the matter in question, since the same thing will be both credible and not credible, which is impossible credible insofar as tending to prove, not credible insofar as needing proof. Therefore, we shall not have a proof justifying us in preferring our own fantasiae to those of the so-called non-rational animals. If therefore the fantasiae differ because of the difference of animals, and it is impossible to decide between them, then it is necessary to suspend judgment concerning the external objects. But for good measure, we go on to match up the so-called non-rational animals with human beings as regards fantasiae. For after our serious arguments, we do not consider it unseemly to poke a little fun at the dogmatists, wrapped as they are in the fog of their discussions with themselves. We usually take the non-rational animals as a group when comparing them with human beings. But since in grouping for an argument, the dogmatists say that the comparison is unfair, we shall for even more good measure carry our joking still further and base the argument on just one animal, the dog, if you will, which seems to be the humblest of all. For we shall find that even in this case, the animals that are the subject of the argument are not inferior to ourselves as regards the credibility of the appearances. So then, the dogmatists acknowledge that this animal differs from us in sensation, for it perceives more by the sense of smell than we do. And they're talking about the dog being able by this sense to track wild animals that it cannot see. And with its eyes, it sees them more quickly than we do. And its sense of hearing is more acute. Okay. Next, let us consider reasoning. One kind of reasoning is internal, the other is express. Let us first look at the internal kind. This, according to those dogmatists who at the moment are our chief opponents, namely the Stoics, seems to involve the following: acceptance of the familiar and avoidance of the alien, knowledge of the arts related to this, possession of the virtues pertaining to one's proper nature, and of those having to do with the pate. Now then, the dog, the animal upon which, as an example, we decided to base the argument, chooses what is congenial to him and avoids the harmful, bunting for food and withdrawing before the raised whip. Furthermore, he has the art, namely hunting, to provide the congenial, nor is without virtue. For certainly, if justice is given to each according to his deserts, the dog, who fawns on and guards his family and benefactors but wards off strangers and malefactors, would not be lacking in justice. And if he has this virtue, then in view of the unity of the virtues, he has them all, which the wise tell us is not the case with the majority of humankind. And we see him valiant and smart in his defending, to which Homer bears witness when depicts Odysseus as unknown to all the people of the household, but recognized by the dog Argus alone. The dog was not deceived by the physical changes in the man, nor had he lost his apprehensive fantasia, which he clearly retained better than the human beings did. And according to Chrysippus, who is certainly no friend of non-rational animals, the dog even shares in the celebrated dialectic. In fact, this author says that the dog uses repeated applications of the fifth undemonstrated argument schema when, arriving at a juncture of three paths, after sniffing at the chew down with which quarry did not go, he rushes off on the third without stopping to sniff. For, says this ancient authority, the dog in effect reasons as follows: the animal either went this way or that way or the other. He did not go this way and he did not go that, therefore he went the other. Furthermore, the dog is aware of and can deal with his own pate. For when a thorn has got stuck in him, he hastens to remove it by rubbing his foot on the ground and by using his teeth. And when he has a wound anywhere, he gently licks off the accumulated pus, since dirty wounds are hard to cure, while clean ones are easily healed. Indeed, he follows very well Hippocrates' prescription, since immobility cures the foot. Whenever his foot is injured, he holds it up and keeps it undisturbed so far as possible. When he is troubled by humors that do not agree with him, he eats grass and then regurgitates the uncongenial material along with it and gets well. Since then, it is apparent that the animal upon which, as an example, we have rested the argument chooses what is congenial and avoids what is troublesome, and possesses the art of obtaining the congenial, and is aware of and able to deal with his own pate, and furthermore is not without virtue, in which elements consist the perfection of internal reasoning. The dog would thus far be without deficiency, which I suppose is why certain philosophers, the cynics, have honored themselves with the name of this animal.
Yeah, I think we may stop here and just have a conversation.
Okay.
So an interesting analogy.
Okay. So I'm gonna, try to remember we stopped at 73 here.
Yeah. It's 14th page.
Or page 14.
Yeah. So again, the same idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
differences in animals, and they perceive the world in special ways and something. Again, I guess the ultimate idea is that there is a nature, there's nothing good or nothing bad.
Right. And that different things perceive things in different manners.
Yeah, but accordingly as you perceive it, you may make a judgment and say, oh, this is like if it injures me or if it has a certain effect on me, it may be good or bad. And then you may overgeneralize and say, if it's good or bad for me, therefore it must be good and bad for everybody else. And then you create the entire philosophy saying that, you know, guys, these things are evil, and these things are good.
Right.
But skeptics, yeah, they try to kind of provide counter
So
arguments.
so they try to be more unbiased, right?
But I think it's kind of independent thinking. So they try to, they kind of make themselves independent from other people who impose their judgments and you know, persuade others to view certain things in a special way. It's not just only, I guess there's no, like, in philosophy, to be a skeptic, you have to have a dogmatist, someone against whom you may, you know, practice your skepticism. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it makes no sense.
Right. Because you need to counter an argument with another argument that is the opposite, essentially. So
You can create any philosophy and skepticism on your own. You can say, okay, this, you know, this is my proposition, and out of this proposition, I'm gonna, you know,
right. It's always a reaction to something, I guess.
yeah, some kind of critical thinking.
Yeah. Which is valuable this day and age. It's valuable to read about skepticism.
It's funny also to see how people argue. Like this guy Saint Empiricus, he basically was, like, he lived 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And sometimes we are told that, you know, people who lived thousands of years ago were stupid, but now you can see, like, that even at that time they already had developed, you know, science, not science, but, you know, some kind of science. But again, they could think
Well,
better.
of course. I mean, the way the Greeks thought, I mean, it was highly developed. I don't know if it was the case for most of the people in the world at that time. I don't think so, but the Greeks, I mean, you read the Greeks and they're so, I mean, they're extremely developed. The only thing that they had less developed, I guess, well, I guess we have some things that are more developed, but in terms of like the individual thinking about the individual thinking, you know, their ways of thinking and living, I mean, yeah, it's extremely developed. A lot, you know, you read someone like this, I mean, he's very high up, you know, very developed, just like many Greek philosophers. And this whole idea of skepticism and how you need to basically counter dogmas, I mean, this is extremely relevant today. I mean, any discussion reveals a number of dogmas. You know, most people you talk to these days, I mean, are extremely dogmatic. So the ability to sort of deal with dogmatic people and dogmas in general, I mean, it's of a great value.
Yeah, sure. I agree.
Yeah. Especially if you have internet discussions, even more so than in real life.
Mhm. I suggest to take some, you know, just to practice it, take some concepts, like some opposites, and try to see you applying skeptical methodology, how we may argue against like some popular ideas.
Well, right now,
Yeah,
right now,
you might just try if you don't mind.
no, we can do that. Yeah, I don't know, like out of the blue like that.
Yeah, I prepared some, some propositions. So
Okay, maybe we can do like one example and try to look at it before we finish.
yeah, one of my favorite is, this idea that you have to be rich, and being rich is something, something valuable.
Okay.
And so you may propose an idea that being poor is also great.
Well, that I guess that would be the skeptic method, right? Because you do the opposite, right? You oppose an idea with the opposite idea.
Yeah, essentially, we know many arguments why it's good to be rich.
Mhm.
So, but we don't know so many arguments of the opposite side. Well, at least it's assuming that we live under the late stage of capitalism. So it seems that the the
Well, it's certainly I think it's fair to say that most people usually associate the fact of being rich with goodness in some sense.
yeah,
I
but
don't know.
does it really bring good?
Huh?
Does it really bring goodness in your life when you are rich?
It does or it doesn't.
Well, I don't know. Like that's the question. So we
Well, yeah, but I think that yeah, you're right that we could try to present some arguments in favor of being poor. Well, what comes to mind is to me is that movie you know that movie Fight Club.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Like when he loses everything, he says something like, "You can only be free when you lose everything." And it's true to a certain extent that having wealth is
Yeah,
you never really feel free. You're always concerned about your possessions. It's very hard to live a free life when you then again you could be a skeptic of your own argument and say, well, you can never be free when you're poor either.
yeah, but the
So
idea is not to present being poor as superior to being rich, but rather to equalize it. So to say like, it's neither. It doesn't matter whether you're poor or rich.
right.
Neither is better than the other.
So how would one go about proving that, saying that there are things in which rich people are better off and things in which poor people are better off, so it kind of like equalizes? Would that be the way to do it?
Yeah, or we may take the famous, ideas concerning wealth, why it's good to have wealth, and just try to reverse them. So, for example, if you have lots of money, you may allow yourself all sorts of things. But then you may say, but do you really need all these things? So if you don't need them, the more wealth you have, the more desires you have, and essentially it leads to immoderate pathos. So you have lots of desires, and they make you kind of disturbed, and you can see clearly what's going on. So I mean, it's on one side it's good to have all these pleasures available for money, but on the other side you may say, but do you really need all these things to live a kind of normal life? So maybe you become, it's the same as having drugs, for example. Drugs makes you happy, but do you really want to have that happiness which you buy for drugs? So in the same way, we may say that if you are poor, that's maybe even better than you are rich. Well, not better, but it's maybe not worse. Certainly, if you know what you're doing,
Right.
there's and if you don't need money for that, what's the problem of being poor? It may be a problem how other people perceive you. Since if you are poor, people don't want to deal with you, and often you are kind of excluded from social life. But does it really matter?
Yeah. um well, you could also say that when you're rich, you have a better social social life, like you're saying, people regard you, they hold you in higher esteem and higher regard. But
but
then
not
again, that's
not
superficial, that's superficial because they are not holding you in high regard. They are holding your money in high regard and not you. So you don't know what people truly feel about you as a person.
and if you're poor and somebody has a relationship with you, it's basically based not on your possessions but on your personality, who you really are.
Right.
The difference too.
Which, yeah, makes a big difference. Yeah, I mean, you see, yeah, obviously you see a lot of rich guys, like they always have very beautiful women with them. But it can hardly be a coincidence. They like to be around the money, but do they really like to be around them as people? That's you know obviously this is well known.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean, it certainly presents issues. Being rich presents problems.
Yeah, and as you said like at the beginning, it's one of the issues is that you basically can't be free. So if you have certain amount of wealth or money, you always have to care. So let's suppose you have like a million bucks on your bank account. So you
Yeah,
can't really feel free, since you always there's disturbing thoughts like, what if my money will,
it's stressful. It's stressful to have money on the bank. Like if you have money in the bank, you're afraid of losing the money.
suddenly you may have a company or you may have some, stock.
That's even more stressful. It's
Yeah,
yeah, it's stressful to have wealth. Yeah. Um, of course, I mean, in a way, it's stressful not to have wealth, but you know, both things provide stress in different ways.
yeah. Again, the truth is, the truth is between. I mean, that you actually, yeah. I guess everybody may figure out it for themselves again. What's the best amount of effort should be invested in making money or doing something else. Like, yeah, I guess kind of hard. It's hard to argue when we do not prepare for it beforehand, and to take some arguments from there and basically say what appears on the top of you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, but I think that's a good example of something that yeah, the fact that being rich is good. I mean, it's not that straightforward. I think, yeah, you can we're taking a skeptical approach to it, and I think it does hold true that there are some problems with being rich, with having wealth.
Now studying this book Beyond Good and Evil,
Yeah.
and the section like, now I'm working on the sixth paragraph, and it's about morality. So, and essentially the idea is that every philosophy grows out of certain impulse, and it's not about even a man. It's about like certain desire which develops in a man and then tries to philosophize and create a kind of philosophy like for itself. So let's suppose that you value like wealth, and this desire for wealth, it basically it creates the entire philosophy by applying this or that philosopher, this or that man, to write about wealth and about the value of wealth. And it's kind of interesting idea that you might basically take every your desire and create some sort of justification for its existence, or not just justification, but some kind of, how to put it.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think I certainly agree with that. I think most of our ideas are actually they're not ends in themselves, right? I mean, they are justifications of something that we feel, you know. And like you say, first you have the desire, and then you have the ideology, not the other way around, right?
And
The
then,
ideology is really just a justification of something that you come up with. That's usually how it goes. Now, real philosophy, as in the philosophy that Plato is describing, is not supposed to be like that. So it's a real challenge to try to do that, to try to not go this path, which I would argue it's probably what 95% of the people in 95% of circumstances do. They actually have a desire and they try to justify it, sometimes better and sometimes worse, depending on their capacity. But that's the path. But if you look at Plato and his dialogues and what he's proposing, that's difficult to do, because you're looking not to justify any desires that you previously had. You're actually looking for
true,
the
right?
truth. Yeah, you're trying to find the arguments that reveal the truth, and that is really not how humans usually do things.
Yeah, Nietzsche attacks exactly this, this proposition that the truth, there is ultimate truth, and he says there's no value in it. Like, he doesn't say there's no value, but he says that there may be more value in the illusion than in truth. And for life, illusion may be even more, may have a higher, more fundamental value than truth. But yeah, this idea of these impulses which you have, now it seems that people who have lots of money, right? So they may not only create philosophies, to write about it and spread this ideology, but they also may use those people who who don't have money, and basically force them to write books about, not just to write books, but essentially to spread and develop this ideology. Whereas those people who are poor, they can't they can't afford this possibility, and that's why probably now it's so popular to be rich and not as popular to be poor or not to be rich. Which is the idea. Like if I'm a rich guy, so I want to be rich. I want to justify my mode of existence. So what am I doing? I'm trying to go and tell everybody that being rich is cool.
Yeah,
And
I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
and
that's you can certainly see that in economics, in economics and political economy, if you will. Um, I mean, it's what people are really interested in is keeping their money or making more money and justifying that. Like people that are well off are going to justify something like income inequality. They'll come up with arguments to justify why they should have more money than the other people,
mhm.
and why they should be able to keep their money. And then you have the opposite, poor people at least some poor people will be, that's how you usually work with socialism, right? And communism, poor people that were really, um, they didn't have a lot of money. They are seduced by the idea that, you should take money from the rich people, or that everybody should have the same amount of money, because that would favor them. It's the same thing as religion back in the day. Why was Christianity so popular? It was because it was a religion that preached that everyone should be equal, right? And when most people were not equal, when most people were very powerless, and there were a lot of people that are superior to them in society, and the idea that they could bring those people down and be on the same plane with them, that was extremely,
A powerful idea.
yeah, extremely powerful idea for them. So because it would favor them. But if you probably ask, the vast majority of people, for example, in Roman society, that were well off, there were, established Roman families and everything. I mean, for them, Christianity would probably have sounded terrible. All of a sudden, you're going to have all these people, like 90% of the people are below you in society, and you want to make them equal. well, that they would have come up with very different theories to justify that no, people are not equal, and that they should keep their place at the top. And then you saw that variations of that throughout European history, right? The whole, all the social philosophies around the society throughout European history, modern European history. I mean, it was just about the powerful, like you say, justifying the fact that they should be in a in power, not just in power, just like in a more privileged position in society because they deserved it, right? And there were lots of, and then eventually you got stuff like the French Revolution, and before that the American Revolution, somewhat more peripheral, but the French Revolution was about, well, why should those people be privileged? Why should those people have everything and we should have nothing? And why should those people tell us what to do? Everybody should be more or less in the same position, which is sort of analogous to what happened when Christianity first appeared. You have this grassroots movement of trying to equalize things. So maybe it's just, and now we have, stuff like extreme income inequality, and we have like a class of very rich people, and then the rest of the people in the world, right? And
it's actually an American dream, so it's still there's an opportunity for everybody. So if you want to be rich, it's just you go and make some business and become rich, and it seems to be possible for everybody to achieve that, but it's false. You can have a society where everybody is equally rich.
Well, that's one, that's an idea. That's one idea. That's one example of an idea that justifies the fact that there should be extreme inequality, right? Oh, I'm here now, but you can be here in the future. Mm-hmm. So if that is right or wrong, I mean, I tend to agree with you that these days it's not so possible. It's fundamentally untrue, but that's not even the point. The point is that depending on where people are in society, depending on their experiences in life, like we were saying before, they will come up with the ideology to prove that that's correct and that should be the case. If they're not in a good position, they'll try to revert the situation, right? So they'll come up with an ideology that will allow them to revert the situation. So it's really just about a bunch of self-serving arguments at the end of the day. That's usually how it goes. Yeah. I mean, philosophy ideally would be about something, finding what is right instead of what we want to be right.
Yeah, again, who for right for whom? So right for philosophy. For a certain man, how he sees.
If you go with the Platonic ideal, right, there is a right for everybody in a sense, a universal right. It's not necessarily a right for everybody at that moment, but it's a universal concept.
But Plato was a man, and he definitely had certain desires, and his view, how universal right should look like. So it was, you can say that it was universal. It was Platonic ideal version of universal truth. And,
right.
And so it's very, when you, for example, I think one of the problem with universal truth and any kind of, universal good is that when it's discovered, it seems to be like, people die and there's a new generation. You don't need to discover anything else. You already know what's the truth. And it seems like for humans be unacceptable. So like I want to create my own truth. Since if there is already like discovered truth, what's the purpose of my life? What should I do? What should I, why does it make any sense to live at all? If there's already everything is known. Must be some element of something that may be discovered further, and to limit it by saying, "Look, this is like the ultimate good. You have to follow this path, and only this path leads to whatever eternity, wisdom, happiness." It seems to be. Well, it may be. It may be even the truth, right? There must be certainly some path which leads to ultimate happiness. But still, like just to follow this path, it's not as interesting as you create your own personal path, even if you're, even if it leads you to some place when you don't want to be. Still, like you may say, "Oh, this is my path. This is how I discovered it. This is how I went it." And yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone has to forge their own path. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that because nobody has really discovered the ultimate path yet. I don't think anyone ever
The question
will.
is it possible to discover it, right?
Huh?
The question is it possible to discover this path?
I think, no, I don't think so. I don't think it's possible to discover that path. It doesn't exist because it's going to depend on the people at the end of the day. I think some things like, for example, um, I don't know if there are, in fact, I don't know if there are any absolute truths as such, unless we're talking about the physical world. But if it's not about the physical world, I'm not sure if there are absolute truths. I think maybe we have things that are close to being absolute truths, but not necessarily absolute, because in order to have an absolute truth, I think it needs to be physical. I think you need to have very physical, that there needs to be a physical component, like you throw a rock and it will fall down, eventually. That is unassailable, that is what's going to happen.
The
It's
same
it's it's yeah, I mean, it's just going to happen. But that's a physical aspect. That's because we have gravity and all that stuff, it's like 2 + 2 is 4, like it needs to be physical. If it's not physical, I think, I'm not saying there's no right and no wrong. Well, even though, if we are skepticals, we should say probably that there's no right or no wrong and no wrong. But I just don't think it's necessarily absolute, especially not in society, because society is always changing. So I think by definition, it can't be absolute. But hey, I think we gotta end it. We gotta end it now. But it was a good discussion.
Okay.
Thanks for watching us. If you were watching us, and we'll be back soon enough.